Leilani Bloomquist, welcome today.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be here with you.
Leilani is principal consultant and chief of staff at her own firm, Leilani Bloomquist Consulting. She's been doing that for about 5.5 years after spending her career in the online education, financial services, and healthcare arena. The entire career has been spent in the digital arena. Just tell us a little bit about how you got started and how and why you aim towards the digital universe.
Like many people of my generation, we didn't necessarily start out with digital careers, but I always had a both curious mindset and loved new tools and tech. And so when I had the opportunity to step into the digital space, originally via project management, I just found that it was a space that I enjoyed working in just immensely. I loved looking at how we could use different tools and techniques to really amplify processes and drive unique customer experiences. And I love the speed at which digital really allowed me to work since I am a person that's really driven and gets a lot of joy from change and leaning into change. And that's just where I've spent the bulk of my career. And then have had the absolute opportunity and joy to grow both with organizations as a full-time employee and then as an independent consultant as well.
What's been the one or two key things that you've enjoyed most about having your own business?
Yeah. Hands down, it's the clients that I have the opportunity to work with and partner with. It's really fantastic to work with very growth-minded C-suite as they're looking at how they can reimagine some of their processes and continue to mature and evolve. And that work is just highly satisfying. And it's also just really quite impressive to see the change agility within the C-suite of many of the clients and customers that I work with when you're driving change from that level of an organization. So I know that there's a lot of transformation programs that stall out or fail. And I've been really fortunate to be a part of quite a few that have been highly successful. And I think that's directly tied to the leaders, both their mindset and also the humility to admit what they don't know and look for partners to help them continue to evolve their skill set and understanding in those spaces where they might have some blind spots.
And what, as you look back over the 5+ years of having your own business, what do you think has been the most challenging thing? Maybe it was something you didn't expect, or maybe you fully expected it
Yeah.
and it's just there front and center. But what's been the most challenging thing for you?
Great question. It's something I talk about often with people that are looking at stepping into the independent space or newer to the independent space overall, and that's the sense of community or loss of community. When you're in corporate environments, you're used to having that community built in around you, and it's really learning to be very intentional about building out your community and your support system, your personal board of directors, honestly, even your hype squad, because we all have those days where we're maybe spinning a little bit too much in our heads or really just need someone in a safe and secure space to be able to bounce some ideas or have those conversations when things are challenging. And even on the flip side, to celebrate the wins. And so, really building out that community has been something that I didn't necessarily anticipate when I stepped out into the independent space, how valuable that was, and how I had just had to be so much more intentional about building in that support system for myself.
You and I met through Darren Lynch of Irish Titan. How have you, speaking of that support system, how have you built that support system for yourself and how did you go about creating that?
Yeah, great question. A lot of it, honestly, was just being really intentional about asking who else I should meet in these spaces and carving out time weekly, monthly to be intentional about networking, both staying connected with the network that I've already built and the people in my network, and also continuing to put myself in spaces and in rooms where I haven't been in before. And what I find is that when you're really intentional about how can I meet more leaders with these type of psychographic qualities or in these particular spaces or within this size of a market, being intentional and being okay asking, which I know in the Midwest, some people are really uncomfortable asking for what they want and need. But most people I find are a part of that go-giver mindset. They're really happy to support you and make those introductions. You just have to be intentional about what ask do you have of them and how can you be specific so they can know specifically how to help you. If your ask is too big and broad, it doesn't give people the guardrails or the right direction or enough information to oftentimes help you and make those introductions. But for the most part, it's just been through those networks, right? At this point, I'm sure if I mapped it, it would just be a massive map on my wall of all the dots connecting and how many connections and made introductions into different spaces as well. And it's something that I do with my community and connections in return.
Yeah, I love the Go Giver book, one of my favorites. And then the follow up book, Go Giver, Sell More. Love the book, love the philosophy, and I try to live that way as well. So I'm with you 100% on that.
I love that.
Let's dive into kind of the meat of what we want to do here today. We're going to talk about voice of customer and voice of employee. Walk us through those concepts. Not everybody have heard of them. Conceptually, they probably would get it, but not everybody have heard of those terms. So again, voice of customer, voice of employee, and tell us and our listening audience a little bit why it's so important for people who are either starting companies, managing companies, or business leaders that are just trying to keep their finger on the pulse of what's going on with their companies.
Yeah, happy to. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I absolutely love it because when you think about voice of customer, voice of the employee, it's not just a feedback mechanism. You're truly creating strategic assets that have impacts across every single division in your company. And so when you think about voice of customer at its highest level, think about it in a way of like how your customers experience your brand, your product, your services. So it's really leaning into that customer experience side. You also gather insights into what they want and need, what's working really well, and what's not working well. And so, again, that provides insights that then you can choose how you take action on throughout your organization. Why I'm really passionate about voice of the employee is I always think about employees as customers as well. They use your products, your services, your tech stack. They also have a huge impact on your customer experience, your end customer experience as well. And they are so close to the front lines. And again, have all insights of what's working, what's not working, what your customers are even telling them, that by not having programs to gather voice of the employee and voice of the customer, you're just missing out on a copious amount of insights that can drive operational efficiencies, that can drive revenue, that can drive deepen share of wallet, that can drive brand loyalty, that can drive increased employee satisfaction, right? Which can also play into retention as well. And so, again, they're strategic assets. And at the core, everyone wants to feel heard and seen and valued. And standing up these programs, regardless of size of company, allows you to do just that. Now, I will also say it's critical that if you're taking the time to gather insight, you need to take action on it. Because on the flip side, if you gather the insights and you do nothing with it, you're going to actually erode trust, both with your customers and your employees. And so the smartest companies that actually have really high customer experience, which then plays into revenue and satisfaction and everything else, they're the ones that are really embedding voice of the customer, voice of the employee in all of their decision loops and decision-making processes.
So you mentioned some things that would improve on the business side. You mentioned at a high level. What specific business results would you expect to improve in companies where the leaders are actually taking these concepts to heart and weaving them into their business practices?
Yeah, great question. To get really more tactical, as an example, if you think about your customer service teams, right? If they really struggle because of having a really convoluted tech stack or really challenging like user experiences of tracking down customer data. So if a customer calls in to a customer service center, if you're investing in improving the employee experiences internally based on that voice of the employee, what you're going to end up seeing from a sheer data perspective would be reduced call time because they can actually get to the answers and answer your customer questions more efficiently and more effectively. Oftentimes you actually see a reduction in churn rates, right? How fast you're having to rehire or loss of employees. So when you think about those retention rates, which that plays into your revenue as well, it costs a lot of money to recruit and train and onboard new employees. And so there's data and metrics specific to retention. You can see higher customer satisfaction scores, which can then be tied directly to repurchase rates as well because of the customer service and customer experience they're experiencing. And so even just looking at the microcosm of just customer service alone, you can see that when you start to both tap into voice of the employee and or voice of customer in that sense and improve the customer and employee experiences, those are some of the direct metrics that you could see and measure and actually put the financial modeling behind to justify those investments.
So, a lot of our listening audience here through Club E and my work at Primacomb Capital are smaller emerging companies, but we also have middle market and larger companies as well out in our audience. Let's say a founder would like to take a stab at this and haven't really done something in the past. And maybe there's an example of a smaller company, 10 employees or less, no budget, and maybe a bigger company. What might be different, or they might be the same, for a business leader that is trying to do something, they want to listen better? What's the first no cost, easy entry point for them to get involved in some of this? Or maybe there's a routine that you'd suggest that they implement.
Great question. Regardless of company size, I think it's always really valuable to look at things in a crawl, run, walk approach, right? We're not successful when we try and boil the ocean right out of the gate, because you're also going to get so many learnings in those early phases. If you have just a handful of employees, you could start by truly showing up to just listen, to gather and observe and hear without judgment, without making excuses as to why things run they are. But just ask your employees, what's one thing making your work harder than it needs to be? And just sitting there and listening, right? And so that's a no cost way for a really small group or organization or team just to open up the dialogue and create that safe space for the feedback to be heard. For customers, right? If most, depending on the organization, there's different ways that you can talk to your customers. And you can simply ask what's one part of your experience that's confusing or feels clunky. If you're able to have that conversation directly, you can create free Google Forms, send out an email and ask for that feedback. There's also really inexpensive tools. And yes, there's much more advanced tools using AI to really assess large amounts of data and everything that, yes, you can mature into. But even a simple tool like Hotjar that you can put on your website, if you do any type of e-commerce or authentication, can do some heat mapping and click tracking just to see where are those points of friction within your online experience as well. And it's really inexpensive, just in a very fast way to start to gather some of that data really quickly. And so there's a lot of opportunity just to do that. Again, start with the crawl and start to gather some insights, and then bring those insights to your team to start to enhance and make changes and measure the impact of those changes. What you'll find is as you start to build in that cycle, people get really excited and then they start bringing more ideas to the table of how they can continue to improve and talk to more customers and gather more feedback. And then as you grow, you can actually grow in teams and tech and processes to continue to enhance that. But there's always simple ways to start. The simplest is just opening up and having a dialogue.
All right. So, speaking of the crawling, walking, running, and just having a conversation and beginning with a dialogue, let's say a company hires you. What roles do you need buy-in from on the front end of the company? Who needs to be involved from the get-go when you get involved? And then what do all these people in these roles that they have, what do they need to do?
Great question. From day one, I think it's most impactful to have the CEO involved. And yes, we're not necessarily talking about enterprise, but small to mid-size. The reason why I always start with the CEO is it's really valuable for them to be able to understand and explain to their team and the broader organization what we're doing and why it's important. If they can't explain what they're doing and why it's important, eventually the momentum around it will peter out or the funding around it will start to dry up. And if your senior leader understands the value of seeking out and gathering that feedback, even if they don't fully understand customer experience or broader transformation or broader digital, but if they understand the value of even where we're starting and can communicate that out, it's hugely impactful for how quickly the broader organization gets on board and supports it. And it's most effective when you have that broad cross-functional team because you're going to gather insights that impact sales and marketing and operations, and it'll impact your IT and back end offices. Sometimes I've heard, oh, that's just a marketing tool. And I'm like, no, yes, it's impactful for marketing, but the entire organization will gather insights from these types of processes and these enterprise assets. Now, once you get past that initial decision maker and they're on board and they're a part of like your steer co, right? So you can think of how often you meet with them. But if they're on board, then oftentimes you want operations, marketing, IT, some of those other key areas involved. Because as you start to kick off that engagement and really start to lean in those insights, you're able to start bringing early insights forward. And you'll start to see those spark moments go off of, oh gosh, that insight I can bring into my team and we can start even making an impact before this engagement is done because we're continually bringing forward insights around, again, what's working well and what's not. The flip side of it, what's working well, we want to celebrate, and we want to celebrate that loud, right, across the organization because you want to really take that start, stop, and accelerate model around what's not working well and what we want to change, and also what's working well and how we want to celebrate and or accelerate. And so when you think about that, it's really, again, that C-suite and then more of the integrator type of roles can be really valuable. And then also looking for your change champions. They're the ones that are excited, regardless of their level in the organization, that as you continue to expand and roll this out, those change champions will help continue to bring excitement and information and be the change drivers in different levels and in different parts of the organization.
So you laid out some of the process in your answer right there. Okay, give a little bit more detail on the various phases and how that works. You introduced it, but maybe give us a little bit more on that.
Yeah, definitely. The first phase is always listening. So seek to understand. It's really listening without judgment or excuses. So it's truly just opening up and listening and gathering that feedback and insights. And then you start to analyze what you're hearing and maybe even observing as a part of those listening sessions and customer interviews and employee interviews. And through that analysis, then you start to identify where you want to drive some change, right? So think about it under the ACT. What do we want to do with this information now that we have it? And where do we want to start? And then it's building out that loop of continually going back, right? Because it's not a one and done. It is a cycle that you want to continue to engage with. And maybe you gather deeper insights on that first listening phase and then analyze and ACT might have multiple phases, but you always want to go back and make sure the changes that you've made are actually making the impact that you want to, both from customer insights as well as from the data, and then continuing to just use that structure overall. So it's really listen, analyze, ACT, and then loop, continue to repeat that.
All right. So, Leilani, can you share a quick story about some feedback that led to a specific concrete fix in a relatively short period of time? You've laid out the phases here. And now give us a story with some positive news because, again, we want to celebrate all the victories here.
Yes, I love it. Yeah, one story that comes to mind is I was working with an organization, their IT and finance teams, and they were investing in a larger enhancement from a technology platform perspective. And we were very intentional about bringing voice of the employee research into this to ensure that we were truly understanding what the finance team's needs were, what their normal routines and responsibilities were. And in having those conversations with the team, one thing we discovered was they actually had a subset of their vendors that if they paid the invoices early, they could recognize a discount. Now, what we also found was that there was no way for them to filter their list, their task list, based on this information. And so they were oftentimes missing this opportunity to realize savings if they paid those invoices early. And their team was just basing their task on like first in, first out. So they didn't have a way to truly prioritize the different work that the finance team needed to prioritize on a daily, monthly, weekly basis. And so based on those insights, what we were able to do was create a way for the teams to be able to identify those specific vendors, filter those. So that was the very first task that their team would tackle on any given day, week, or month. And then also ensure that there was reporting that the leaders could pull so they could actually create goals around making sure that 90% of the savings were realized because they were able to pay those invoices on a much faster cadence and ensure that they actually could have those organizational savings. And so it might seem small, but just truly spending some time with that finance team and understanding how they worked and some of the nuances of the different vendors and contract relationships, we are able to create different features and functionality within the tool that they worked in and day out, 5 days a week, right? All throughout the 52 business weeks of the year, and also able to create some true revenue savings and some goals around that. So they had the measurement and then they had the data to back it up. So revenue savings, of course, they were operational efficiencies. The finance team felt better about the work that they were doing because they could directly see how it was impacting the broader organization. And that's an opportunity just to show a small win of how that works, even when you're just talking to your own employees on an internal basis.
And you mentioned earlier the problem that is caused when information is gathered and then no action. The opposite of a victory is, hey, this is a big time failure. How can leaders avoid the trap of just gathering a bunch of information and then not taking action? And I believe what you had said is it erodes the trust and basically torpedoes the initiative.
Yeah. If you think about even just in your own personal relationships, if you've ever given someone feedback around something that you would like to change or dynamic that you would like to change, and if you had to keep telling them and nothing ever happened, eventually you would just stop sharing, right? You would stop actually engaging. And the same thing happens when you think about your employees and your customers. If you're asking them, how are we doing? How can we improve your experience? What's working well? What's not working well? And you have all of those insights and you do nothing with it, eventually, one, they're just going to stop sharing feedback with you. So you're not even going to know what's going wrong or what's not working. You might find that employees choose to leave and work elsewhere because they feel more valued as a part of their job. Oftentimes you might see that results in even simple things like employee engagement surveys. Maybe you just have less people even filling them out because you're asking for feedback and you're not doing anything with it. That's a simple example as well as just your employee feedback like survey, right? If you do the survey and you have the insights, but you're not doing anything with it, you start to erode trust. From a customer perspective, if they're telling you this is wrong or I'm challenged when I'm trying to engage with you, eventually the customer effort, the amount of effort it takes them to do business with you gets too large, where then they actually seek a different company, partner, solution, right, to do business with and to share their business because the effort of doing business with them is less than it is to do business with you. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can see the negative impact of asking for that information and doing absolutely nothing with it. It's worse than not asking for the information at all because you're actually taking the time and they're investing their time and energy sharing with you. And then you're just simply letting it die on the vine.
And then human nature is to not want to change. So if you looked at 10 companies that went through an initiative like this or 100, how would you break it up roughly? This is obviously anecdotal. How would you break it up on the ones that do it quite well and the ones that maybe don't do it so well based on the inaction that occurs?
Yeah. I don't have any readily available data around voice of the customer, voice of the employee, but if we bring it up a level and just look at a transformation in general, and transformation at the core is driving change and evolution within your company. A recent study by Bain that came out at the end of last year showed that only 9% of transformation programs were successful, met their original goals. And so you see that that's a very small number. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not pockets of success within those larger programs, but human behavior is very similar to water. It often takes the path of least resistance. And so you do have to be thoughtful of who is actually setting the precedence of how important this is, which is why I always say it's really critical to start with the CEO, because the programs that I've been a part of, when the CEO is embedded in understanding the what and the why, even if they don't know exactly what it's going to look like or how we're going to get there, but they're level setting the importance of these investments in changing and how we're evolving as a company, and having that growth mindset. Also, the humility to admit what they do and don't know, and that they're being open-minded of learning and evolving. And then another part that I think is really critical is assigning this responsibility to someone. And yes, customer experience is owned by all, right? As we think about that globally, but someone needs to be responsible for how these insights are being driven and embedded in each of the different organizational functions. And so when we think about what provides success versus what you see in some of the programs that fail, there's some common themes that you start to see in each of those camps.
Bouncing from things not working to back to things working. Sometimes a win is just a better culture, and it doesn't mean that there's a significant change or there's a new feature to what they're doing. It's just a better culture. How can you put a dollar sign on that, and or create some sort of rough financial benefit to try to convince a skeptical CFO who maybe doesn't want to spend the money that this is actually paying off?
Yeah. Just even taking this simple data point around retention. There was a customer service team that I was working with that had a 40% turnover rate. So if you think about just impacting retention by 20% in that department, what that revenue dollar looks like, and that's not even counting in the other customer impacts, right? Of like the lower call volume and the ability to handle more calls because it takes less time for the customer service reps to do their job and to be able to answer the customer questions, or the customer engagement scores, right? It's not taking any of those other data points together, but just looking at retention and turnover rates, it's really easy to start to very quickly quantify the impacts of this. And yes, that does play into a better culture as well. In general, you're also going to see faster adoption. When people feel seen and heard and valued, they're much more likely to get on board because their voices are playing a role in the changes that are coming. And so there's less resistance. And so you do see, as you're rolling out new tools and new processes and procedures, they get on board faster. And so you see the impacts. And again, that's the cultural aspect as well. Employees who feel heard deliver better service. So if you think about net promoter scores and the impacts on customers in that aspect as well. And again, that's just looking at just pure of the employee side. There is a lot of data and research out there that shows improved and high customer experience does equate to true revenue in dollars as well. And if you think of some of the industry leaders in a very elevated customer experience, let's look at Apple and let's look at American Express. Neither are low value ticket products, right? People happily pay for their products, but their customer experience and their customer service is paramount, right? It really is always a shining star when you think about where they stand in that broader market. And neither of those organizations are suffering from a revenue perspective, right? And you even hear that from an employee perspective. I know people that have worked with American Express for decades and they really enjoy their jobs. And listening isn't it's not a soft skill, it's a multiplier. And you can really start to see it embedded in each of the different metrics. And just more broadly, like employee retention, especially those high performers, right? High performers, even in markets like today, don't have issues getting jobs, right? They're able to, or people will poach them, right? Recruiters will poach them or other people want to recruit them. And so there is an ROI and it is a foundation. Now, the other plug I would give is putting into practice some of this voice of the employee and truly valuing what you hear is the foundation for also creating psychological safety in organizations. And if you ever want to get to a culture of innovation, you need to have psychological safety within your teams. So again, these aren't just fluffy soft skills. These are truly ways to build cultures in teams that will actually help your company not only evolve, but truly innovate in the long term as well.
I love the listening, not a soft skill, it's a multiplier. So I'm going to take that one with me. Thanks for sharing that. Hey,
Me too.
from the executive's vantage point, are there any KPIs that you can pair both the customer data as well as the employee data in a way, whether it's on a dashboard or report or whatever, that allow execs to see what's going on and try to create a cause and effect view?
Yeah, that's a great question. One, I always say just start asking for customer feedback as quickly as you can. I've known some companies that say, we don't want to ask for it because we know it's not great right now. And I always say, that's your baseline. And so ask now. So you create your baseline and you can actually truly have data and measure to see the impacts of it. There's customer effort scores. I love that one because you're asking just simple questions of your customers around how easy it was to do business with them or for them to do business with you. And when you start to align the changes in customer effort scores with the data around checkout, right? So if you look at total cart or volume of purchases per customer, there's obviously different retail and distribution and other models. But if you start to align those, you'll start to see a correlation there as well. And so the data around those pieces, you can also look at your your employee retention rates or some of the metrics. And generally speaking, you'll see a lot of correlation when you actually start to make the improvements across multiple metrics. And now, of course, it's always really critical to start to look at one, what can we measure? What do we have the data around, right? And maybe what are some of the like leading versus lagging indicators too of some of the success? And how can you start to identify what metrics you're watching overall? There's been different case studies around, for instance, from a manufacturing plant perspective. One of the leading indicators was of them hitting their goals, right? And actually production, and again, this is talking to the employees, was around days missed, right? Or days of attendance. And so if there's issues with people actually being able to get to work or have the right support systems, et cetera, Patagonia and REI are some great examples of creating support for families, which of course then allows them to be at work. And that plays into overall production and productivity for organizations as well. So those listening spaces can come into play in different ways, and looking at the leading indicators versus lagging indicators, which will be more of the end production and revenue and hitting the goals.
So of all these different things that an exec can do, how do they pick the right feedback channel for their company? Because maybe it is unique or different to each particular company based on the dynamics and characteristics of that business.
Yeah. I think that's where really partnering with someone that has the CX skills or has some strong foundation in it, they can really work with the executives to understand what can we measure, what tools do we have, what channels do we have to even talk to our customers today versus ones that we want to mature into. And then they can start to identify which ones make the most sense. And also where can we start to build out some initial KPIs and dashboards, and where do we maybe want to evolve into? Because as we know, oftentimes data can be the long pole in the tent as well. And there are times that we need to be able to marry the data together to get more advanced in the different channels and different avenues that we can leverage. But I would say if you don't have the skills internally, if you can tap into a CX consultant, they can partner with you to better understand the newly unique nuances of your business in particular, and then create a good starting point.
Are there best practices for trying to get meaningful responses from customers? And if so, what are the top one or two? Similarly, the flip side of that coin is, are there some common practices that actually hurt participation in trying to get feedback from customers versus actually doing some benefit?
Yeah. Some of the things that hurt, we've already talked about, is asking for feedback and doing nothing with it. Sometimes the gap is you've asked for feedback and you've implemented some changes, but you haven't always closed the loop and circled back to say, oh, by the way, these changes were informed by the feedback you gave, right? So sometimes it's even helping to close the loop around some of the changes that were made. Being thoughtful around what questions you're asking, right? In the surveys, whether it's surveys or one-on-one interviews. And I think surveys can be really valuable and beneficial when you're looking for a large volume of responses. The one-on-one interviews just allow you to go so much deeper and ask those additional clarifying questions and watch the nonverbals as a part of it. And so I think there can be opportunities again to go through both. One thing that could hurt is if you don't have someone trained as someone that can facilitate these conversations or that gets defensive, right? Could be something that would hurt. So again, it's having the right people either leading those interviews and or drafting those surveys, people that have experience and expertise in those areas would be a positive versus something that might end up hurting. And then of course, sometimes it's also just the length of like how much time and energy people would need to provide or to give you all the answers. And so just being thoughtful of the length and the time commitment that people have to provide feedback. And so when you think about customer feedback, there's those small, snackable, like consumable ways to gather short amounts of feedback versus maybe the longer annual surveys that you would put out to customers or customer research that you would give, or maybe setting up a customer advisory panel. And again, with the advisory panel, the expectation is that it's going to be a valuable use of their time and they're going to directly see the impacts of the feedback that they're giving you. So one thing that could hurt is you're asking your customers to be a part of an advisory panel, not giving them a valuable or constructed experience when they are giving you their time. And then again, not doing anything with the feedback would be some things that would hurt. But those are one of the very many levers that you could pull when you're looking at gathering customer feedback. But the hurting primarily is in the doing nothing, right? Space overall.
So, Leilani, all this work about voice of the customer, voice of the employee, ultimately what we're trying to do is get a better company providing better products and services to their customers. Maybe talk about an instance where you've seen work with the employees and letting them voice their perspectives and how that's actually shaped the customer or product, service, or experience.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I love it. I've actually seen and been a part of organizations where we've had frontline employees gathering a lot of feedback around some of the product offerings that the company had and sold. And they took the initiative to also do some additional competitive research because they were identifying a theme about two of the product offerings where they really weren't as competitive as some of the other offerings out there. And so they were seeing less consumption, right? And less people purchasing those offerings. And once they were able to bring all of those insights forward with both the competitive research and the volume of customer insights as well, then the leaders in the organization in that functional area took that feedback and actually modified the product offerings and then relaunched those product offerings in less than a year. And with this company, that was a pretty fast turn cycle because they were a little bit more highly regulated. And so that's an opportunity where you allow the listening and those feedback channels to be open between employees and leadership around what they're hearing and seeing on a daily basis. And also being open to hearing that feedback and taking it forward and doing some additional research and validation that then continues to evolve your product offerings, making you more competitive in the broader landscape. And so it's really fun when you see that. And it's also really energizing too for the employees because they see the direct impact of the work that they've done on the broader product offerings.
Cool. Love it. Hey, what's a coming trend that you see happening that's going to surprise business leaders who maybe aren't listening to the voice of their employees? Maybe it's a new law, maybe it's a new technology, maybe it's just the way our workforce is evolving post-COVID. Anyway, what's a trend that business leaders will regret not paying attention to?
Oh, that's a good question. It's Gen AI is everywhere these days, right? Rightfully, it's highly disruptive and it's also really fantastic. And there's so many opportunities for organizations to tap into that from a tool perspective. as you think about how embedded AI, Gen AI will be in frontline tools from customer service to HR platforms, organizations that haven't listened to their customers and employees, and they maybe don't have the right depth of understanding their stakeholders, they might be automating assumptions or processes that are not really impactful, where you might see some erosion of trust versus amplification of trust, right? And driving more operational efficiencies in the right area. And so I think there's always going to be that lens of utilizing the tools and tech that we have to amplify the work that we're already doing, but you really need to make sure that you're always bringing in that human element, which is your customers and your employees that you serve. So making sure that you're rolling out transformations that don't feel tone deaf or relevant or maybe even harmful in those senses. And we've already heard some of those different instances in the market that we don't necessarily need to repeat today. But some of those risks could have been mitigated if they'd actually spent the time investing in this feedback loop of even just talking to those that they serve.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. If you were to take one piece of information from our talk here today and reiterate that as the key point, the key takeaway that you'd like our audience to take with them as they go forward with their various businesses, what would that be?
I would always say there's power in the pause. So pausing to listen and ask for feedback and gather insights from your customers and employees does take time. We're not talking about 6 or 12 months, but it takes time. And in today's marketplace, oftentimes there's just bias for action and speed, but there's so much power in the pause and listening, because what you will find is the areas that you're taking action on and that you're investing in from a time and money and capacity standpoint are going to be far much more impactful and valuable versus just always running at as fast as you possibly can. And so it can be really hard for leaders to lean into intentionally pausing and bringing that practice forward. And it is one of the best investments that you can make for yourself, for your team, and for your organization.
Great. Last question for you today. This is a favorite one that I ask many of our guests. Thank you again, Leilani Bloomquist, for being with us today and sharing some of your wisdom and insights. It's been very valuable. Is there a piece of advice, whether it's business or life advice, that you wish you would have gotten sooner, whether it be earlier in your career or just earlier in your life journey?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. It's a good one. I wish someone had told me earlier my ability to connect across functions and personalities and perspectives was my superpower. I'm very naturally a translator and a very curious person, that I don't fit well in a box. And that's one of the most valuable things that I bring to the table is I don't fit well in a small, refined box, and that I can really, instead of downplaying it, design my career around it. And so early on, I thought I had to specialize or go deep in one lane. And what I've come to realize is that my biggest strength is being able to bridge disciplines and be that translator that can actually help unify functional areas. And so that being a systems thinker isn't a detour, but it's a differentiator, I think would have been valuable to learn about myself earlier on than I did. But I'm grateful that I know it now.
All right. Thank you again for being here with us today, Leilani. Very valuable information. Appreciate your insights. I learned a lot. I know our audience has too. And I know that you and I have another topic or two that we're going to talk about. So thank you for being here today, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you. I'm grateful for our time together and look forward to our next conversation.
All right, great. Thank you very much.